This is a 2015 Ferrari F12 Berlinetta, and it is one of my favorite modern Ferrari models. When this car debuted 6 years ago, it was the most powerful road-going Ferrari ever, thanks to a 730 horsepower V12 up front. Today, 6 years after it first went on sale, it's still pretty awesome. I've borrowed this F12 Berlinetta from O'Gara Coach here in La Jolla, California. O'Gara is the Lamborghini, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley dealership here in the San Diego area, and occasionally they get cool used cars in from time to time, and few are cooler than this one. So here's the deal. The F12 came out back in 2012, and it's the predecessor to the 812 SUPERFAST, which I've already reviewed and which I'm going to link in the description below. Like I mentioned, the F12 has a 730 horsepower V12, and it's mated to a dual clutch automatic. The result is 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds and a top speed of 211 miles an hour, which makes it monstrously, ridiculously fast. It's also becoming more affordable, at least by exotic car standards. O'Gara has this example listed in the mid $200,000 range, which is still a lot of money, obviously, but way less than the original sticker price, which was probably around $400,000 just 3 years ago. And it still has modern everything and an amazing driving experience, and that, to me, makes this one of the best modern Ferrari models. Today I'm going to review the F12, and I'm going to show you all of its interesting quirks and cool features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a DougScore. And for more of my thoughts on the F12, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a ranking of my favorite Ferrari models in history, at least in my opinion. Now I'm going to start on the outside of this car with the most interesting quirk about this car, and that would be this little light down here. You got the two brake lights on the side, you get the third brake light on the top, and then you have this. So what exactly is it? Well, that's the rear fog light. In Europe, it's mandated that cars have a rear fog light, so if you're driving in foggy conditions, other drivers can see you better. It's not used commonly in North America, but it is in Europe, and this is where the rear fog light is in this car, these 12 little holes of red light. Now, the interesting thing is, why is it in the middle and why does it look like this? Well, it was designed to resemble the rear fog light in Formula One race cars, and frankly, they did a great job. It looks very similar and it looks very cool. It makes this thing look like it has a fog light from a race car. It's really cool. One thing I didn't know about the F12 rear fog light is at the bottom of all the lighting, you have the backup camera. That's where the reversing camera is integrated in this car. They do a pretty good job of hiding it with all of the other little light holes. But the rear fog light isn't the only cool lighting related item back here. Another cool thing is the taillights. Now, they look like regular Ferrari circular taillights. They have the turn signals inside of them. But the really cool thing is what they look like if you look closely. It looks like sort of an orb of lighting when you get in there. It is actually a very beautiful look. I'm not really sure how intentional that was, but I love how the taillights look when they're just turned on. And of course, since I'm back here, it would be criminal to do a review of the F12 and not show off the exhaust note. And so, well, take a listen. Next we move on to the side of the F12, where there is one interesting noteworthy item. I always knew that the fender sort of had this cut in it that gave the car kind of a distinctive look on the side. One thing I didn't know, though, is that this panel goes over it and there's a hole in there. There's like a flying buttress. That's what they called it on the 599 GTB when it was in the back. But here it is in the front. There's a hole in the front fender of the F12. Who knew? Now, next up, moving around to the very front, there are a couple of interesting quirks up here. Maybe my favorite is the turn signals. Now, in your car, in most cars, it's just one little light that lights up orange when you're turning. In this car, it is 8 separate lights that are arranged in sort of a stair-step pattern within the headlight module, and it is a very cool look when the turn signals are on. And next up, we move under the hood, where you can look at the giant engine. Just like in the 812 SUPERFAST, it is absolutely huge, and it is mid-mounted. The bulk of the engine is behind the front axles, which is better for weight distribution. Now, one interesting item, at the base of the engine, you will see that this car has its chassis number listed, and to me, this is a very interesting piece of Ferrari trivia, and I think it's worth mentioning. Now, Ferrari chassis numbers started with 1 back when Ferrari was founded as a company and have basically counted up since then. So this car is the 206,272nd Ferrari. Or at least it would be
Ferrari, except for a long time in the early years, race cars got odd numbers and road cars got even numbers, and there was a period where they skipped a bunch too.
But basically, and especially in the last 30 or 40 years, they've been just counting up. The chassis number is also the last 6 digits of the VIN, and in my experience, most Ferrari owners have their chassis number memorized and they know exactly where they fall in the Ferrari sequence. Next up, we move on to the F12's trunk, which is actually a hatchback, and it's reasonably roomy back here. You could stick some luggage back here, an overnight bag. You can see that there's already a bag back here, and that contains the car cover. Now, there are a couple of interesting items I noticed in the trunk. One is that the tailgate lid itself has a picture on it near the top of an F12 with the tailgate up. The 812 Superfast had the same thing, and I have no idea why. Is it so that you can see how your F12 looks with the tailgate up while you're getting stuff out of your F12 with the tailgate up? It's very weird, but it is maybe a little charming. The other interesting thing in here is if you pull up the floor in the cargo area, you will notice that there is a tool kit. Now, it seems absolutely ridiculous in the modern era that a Ferrari owner, after spending $250,000 for one of these, or $400,000 when this was new, would be using their toolkit to fix stuff on the side of the road when their F12 breaks down. But it's a throwback to the old days when the owners were often racing drivers or people who had good mechanical sense, and that actually happened. And Ferrari still puts this in there, as they have ever since the old days, so that you could work on your car if you absolutely have to. You can see there are even replacement fuses in here. Now, for proof that Ferrari actually intends you to use this stuff, this little red bag contains gloves, so that when you break down on the side of the road, you put the gloves on and your hands won't get dirty while you're fixing your Ferrari. Next up, we move on to the interior of the F12, where there are quite a few unusual quirks and features. I'm going to start with the climate control vents, which I just think are so cool. First off, they look awesome. They look like a weapon, but also you can move them and place them exactly how you want. Instead of normal square climate control vents, you have to move left, right, up, down. These things can move in all directions, so you can put the air precisely on your chin, if that's where you want it. But while the climate control vents are fantastic, the climate controls themselves are absolutely perplexing. Most cars have figured out a way to make climate controls like 3 or 4 dials. In this car, there are 5 dials and then another 5 buttons, and 2 of the dials are just crazy. The dials that allow you to choose where the air comes out. On the left, you can choose between up and towards you, or down and towards you. On the right, you can choose up and down, and just down. It's a lot of different arrows to kind of put up with. And frankly, those climate controls are all kind of cheap looking plastic. To me, that's really the only drawback in this interior, which is otherwise fantastic. An example of the fantastic interior is behind the seats. Now, this car doesn't have rear seats, but it does have a luggage shelf back there, beautiful leather finished luggage shelf, and it has these beautiful leather straps inside the luggage shelf so you can tie down your cargo so it doesn't get lost. Even the straps are red stitched to match the exterior of the car. Very nice looking for something that'll probably never really get used. Another cool item in the interior is the center cup holder. There's only one, but it is cool in its design. When there's no cup in it, it has these 2 little silver panels on the left and right that sort of preserve the look of the center console. But when you have a cup in it, the panels fold away to allow the cup to go into place. That is a pretty neat trick and a pretty cool idea, but it is nowhere near as cool as the center armrest. Check this out, the center armrest can go forward or backwards depending on where you want to rest your arm. That's not particularly unusual, but it also opens to reveal a little storage area. The crazy thing to me is that the center armrest can open regardless of where you have it for your arm. If you have it all the way forward, open it. If you have it all the way backwards, open it. It has sort of a trick little latch that allows it to perform that way. That is actually pretty good thinking, Ferrari. Now, as for the steering wheel, like most modern Ferrari models, basically everything you use frequently is on the steering wheel. For example, there's no turn signal stalk that you press coming off the steering column to turn on the turn signals. Instead, the turn signals are buttons on the left and right of the steering wheel. Same goes to flash the brights. It's a little button on the steering wheel, and same goes to turn on the windshield wipers and the windshield washers. It's a little switch on the steering wheel that you push or pull depending on what you want. Also on the steering wheel is the engine start button, but unfortunately it's not as simple as getting in the car and pressing the button. Instead, you have to get in the car, put the key in, turn it, like every other car and then push the engine start button, which really just adds a step to the process. But I think they do it because we all think engine start buttons are really cool, and they're right. Now, one thing you won't easily find on the steering wheel is the horn. The middle part with the Ferrari logo, that's not the horn. You press it and nothing happens. Instead, the horn is hidden sort of at the top of the steering wheel near where you put your thumbs. There are little horn buttons that are sort of integrated into the wheel rim that you wouldn't really notice. Not sure why they didn't put it in the middle, but they didn't. Now, the thing that's probably most interesting about the steering wheel is the little switch that controls the drive modes. The switch allows you to choose between wet, sport, race, CT off, and ESC off. When you go into ESC off, you're turning off traction control and stability control, and you have to really, really commit to that. First off, it's not a setting you can choose. You actually have to hold the little switch in place before you can turn off ESC. And once you do, a little light comes on that little switch panel reminding you that ESC is off, but that's not the only thing that happens. The car also beeps at you with like a loud warning beep to let you know you've done it. And it pops up a warning message to let you know you've done it. And once the message goes away, there is a little light illuminated in the gauge cluster to let you know you've switched it off. So there are many different things that happen when you turn off ESC as a reminder that maybe you shouldn't do this unless you know what you're doing. Another interesting item, the seats in this car have a little tag on them that says Baby Smart. The seats are baby smart in the F12 Berlinetta. I guess that's because they work with a child seat. They have child seat anchors. Whatever, but either way, if you want to know whether your F12 is baby smart, the answer is yes. Now, looking around the interior the last few minutes, you might be wondering, where's the radio? You can see the climate controls are in the middle, but there's no radio there. Well, that's because the radio is completely controlled within the gauge cluster screens. The screen on the right is full color, and it controls the radio. And that means the radio itself is completely controlled by the driver. And it is controlled using just two dials to the right of the steering wheel. The tiny one, that's the volume control for the radio. The one on the left controls everything else. Now, this is pretty cool in the sense that it's very minimalistic. It gets the radio clutter out of the center of the car, but the problem is it's actually kind of difficult to use. First off, the passenger can't use it at all, and the driver, even when the driver tries to use it, it's a challenge. For example, there's no preset buttons. So if you want to change the station, you actually have to go into the screen, into the radio menu, press the down arrow on this dial, and then kind of scroll through the presets to the one you want. It's a lot more challenging than just pressing preset number 4 in your Honda Accord. Now, a couple of other interesting things in that gauge cluster screen on the right. It also contains the navigation system. The navigation map for this car is completely contained in that screen. So again, the passenger has no access to it. One interesting item, I was looking at points of interest, and it gives you the opportunity to search for automobile dealerships. When you click on that, it gives you a comprehensive list of every brand, including some brands we don't even get in the United States, like Renault is on this list. So if you're driving along in your Ferrari and you want to look up where the nearest Subaru dealership is, strangely, you can do that. One interesting item I found is that there are two different options for BMW, one with the MW in lowercase and one with the MW in uppercase. I clicked on it, it turns out BMW lowercase is for American dealers, BMW uppercase, only a dealer comes up in Mexico. I'm not sure why they get capital letters, but I guess Ferrari decided that Mexican BMWs get BMW fully capitalized. Another interesting item in the navigation system, you go into settings, you can click on something called emergency information, and then it will send you to the nearest hospital, police station, or fire department at your choosing. But when you click on any of those things, it pops up a little warning that says, in case of emergency, please contact the facility to verify their availability before proceeding. Ah, thank you for that, Ferrari. It sounds like the kind of thing my mom would say. Oh, before you run off to the hospital, you better call them to make sure they're still open. And your F12 also gives you a similar reminder. Now, in addition to that screen on the right, there's also a full color screen over on the left, which is controlled by another set of dials to the left of the steering wheel. Now, I've always thought one of these dials was especially cool. It's the one that says pit speed. It allows you to set a speed that the car won't go over if you're in a pit lane and there's a speed limit so track workers aren't injured. You can set that with this little dial and then the car won't exceed that speed limit when you're in the pit lane on a racetrack. That is so cool, but I learned something about pit speed. It's also the cruise control button. If you press it and hold it down, it turns on cruise control, which makes it seem way less cool. Ferrari has it labeled as pit speed, but really most people are going to use it as cruise control. I think that's a case of Ferrari trying to make this little thing seem a lot cooler and racier than it actually is. Now, also in that little screen on the left, there is a car setup menu where you can choose various different things like lighting and door locks, that sort of stuff. Maybe more interesting in there, though, is something called RPM on steer. Now, basically what this does is there are little lights on the top of the steering wheel that light up when you're getting close to red line, so you're at really high speed to let you know that it is time to shift. And you can use the RPM on steer item in the car setup menu to turn those lights on or off. These lights are incredibly cool. I can't show them to you because when you're going that speed, you gotta have both hands on the wheel, but you can see them when I start up the car. They turn on to just kind of show you that they're there. So those are the quirks and features of the F12, and now it's time to get it out on the road and see if the driving experience lives up to how great this car looks on paper. All right, driving the F12. I think this car is so cool. Now, it's hard to experience that speed completely here in La Jolla, where O'Gara is located, but I did drive the 812, and that was monstrously fast as well. And also, it's kind of interesting to see how this car is in terms of usability, because this is intended to be kind of a more usable Ferrari. You know, the mid-engine cars are the crazy sports cars you're supposed to take fast on the track. This is a car you're intended to be able to kind of grand tour in with the leather luggage strap in the back and the big cargo area. Driving it along down regular roads like this, it feels, the ride is harsh. There's no doubt about that. But the interior feels comfortable. You have very nice interior, very nice materials, and a lot of room. This is the kind of exotic car where no one would ever ask, oh, how do you fit in that thing if you're tall? People keep asking about that about my GT. This car, everyone would just assume, oh yeah, you can fit. If you get one of these in silver or in some other kind of muted color, this is the kind of car that you can drive totally under the radar and no one would ever know that you're in a Ferrari. And really that leaves you to enjoy it, which is one of the reasons why I've always kind of preferred the front-engine V12 cars like this one to the crazy mid-engine loud look-at-me kind of cars. With that said, the performance is absolutely fantastic. Even just a half throttle, you feel like you're on top of the world. The car, when it's accelerating, it feels very capable. You know, if I drop down a few gears, and by the way, the transmission is not only fast, but smooth. The transmission is very good at gear changes, even as I go lower down gears at lower speeds. Usually that's where transmissions get clunky. This one doesn't feel clunky. So anyway, I step on it. I only got up to, I don't know, 50 there or something, but oh, it's so fast. I love sports cars that are manual transmission, low, you know, like the Ford GT that I have. It's so cool, but it's also nice to be able to have a sports car and use it all the time. Not too many people have that opportunity. And this is a car that you can do that with, and the only thing stopping a normal person is the money, and that's a big deal. So I'm very jealous of people who don't have to worry about that. Wow. Wow. It's just so fast. The thing is, I did the video on the 812, and that car is absolutely fantastically wonderful, just as this one is. But it's not so dramatic of an improvement that you're like, you got one of these and you're like, oh, you know, I gotta go out and spend another $500,000, $450,000. This car for $250,000 is mostly the car that the 812 is. Nobody can tell the difference who's a normal person anyway, and the performance is so incredible in both cars, it doesn't really matter. Do you really need the extra 50, whatever, 80 horsepower that the 812 has? Of course the answer is no. This gives you more power than you could ever possibly want. And so that's the F12 Berlinetta. This is no longer the latest and greatest V12 Ferrari model, but it's a lot less expensive than the 812 Superfast that replaced it, and this isn't exactly slow or outdated. Truthfully, this is one of the best modern Ferrari models, one of the best complete packages, and now it's time to give it a DougScore.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the F12 is beautiful, but the styling is just a little more bland than I'd like, maybe a bit too much like a Corvette, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration, it does 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Handling is excellent with impressively little body roll, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Fun factor is obviously massive with that much power and that engine note, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor is also very high, as everyone knows it's a cool special V12 Ferrari, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 43 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories. Starting with features, the F12 has all the necessities, but it lacks the luxury car amenities, no surprise, and not a problem. It gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is fine, the ride is harsh but acceptable, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is excellent, the interior is wonderful with excellent materials everywhere, but the 812 is just a bit nicer, and so the F12 gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality Functionality is high for a 2-seater owing to the huge cargo space, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Value is strong. A used F12 offers near 812 performance for dramatically less money, and it looks largely the same. It earns a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 28 out of 50. Added up, and the DougScore is 71 out of 100, which places it just a point behind the 812 SUPERFAST and really high on the all-time list. This is a great car and a surprisingly good all-around usable car that happens to also be a supercar, and pricing is pretty reasonable by supercar standards too.